Here we are, another wonderful morning with your daily dose of Planet Cool Stuff. My name is Rob McCallum, and today, as you can see by the topics on this side over here, we're going to be talking about a GoldenEye doc called Golden Era, Dave Filoni, some big Star Wars news, Superman casting, and we're going to talk about sports-based video games as well. Let's jump into it. Of course, if you're in the chat, throw a question, say hi. We'll get to those comments and hopefully drive the discussion in a few different directions. I want to talk about this whole episode as, them telling us this is what matters. It's almost like, oh, this is news and you need to pay attention because there's going to be big changes coming. So you better get ready. I don't know if it's a primer all the time that explains things. I don't know if it's trying to build hype. I don't know why half of this stuff needs to get reported. We're going to go into it. Of course, I want to let you know that Planet Cool Stuff, as evident by our banner that just appeared at the bottom, has a live Kickstarter right now. Planet Cool Stuff on Kickstarter. We had an amazing day one. We're almost 2/3 to our goal, and this is your exclusive chance to get a DVD or Blu-ray of the entire series. 13 episodes of pop culture goodness, dipping into every realm of pop culture. Okay, so we got video games, we've got toys, we've got movies, we even have music and TV, cartoons, just a little bit of everything for everyone, and that includes you. So let's get to the first topic today. And I don't even know if you knew about this or not, but there is a documentary out there on GoldenEye. And of course, because Jay and I are making N64 Quest, we're big GoldenEye fans. And if you played during the N64 era, I am guessing that you too are a GoldenEye fan. There's usually a handful of games that everyone played in the N64 era. Let me see if I can go through them and see how close I am to getting your must-play N64 games or what you played with. There's GoldenEye, and then maybe by proxy, Perfect Dark. There's maybe Super Bomberman, but probably not. That's probably a fringe choice for some people. I'm going to guess Wave Race because it was an earlier title. But again, fringe choice. Like, I want to talk about the staples of the 64. So, GoldenEye, Smash Brothers, Mario Party, and of course, Mario Kart. And I would say for a lot of people, another big series would be the THQ wrestling games, right? I think we're all in the same boat, like WrestleMania 2000, WrestleMania No Mercy, WWF, and then the WCW ones. WCW versus NWO, WCW Revenge. Oh, those games were so good. That's what I loved. I loved that it was so pick up and play, very arcade driven, lots of customization in terms of how your characters looks, the skins and whatnot. And I don't know why they haven't been able to capture that formula again, that magic in a bottle, the way that it did with those games. There were several games out there during that era that just worked that well, you know. And yet, with everything that's come since and all the evolution of graphics and gameplay, how come we haven't had any games that have been able to replicate that? Which leads me to wonder, is it about the gameplay or is it about the experience sitting side by side on the couch? I'm sure that's part of it. But I want to talk just pure gameplay because I don't think that there has been a single wrestling game out there that has had the addictive uh, feeling, that tangible stickiness to playing when you pick up a controller and you play those THQ, WWF, WrestleMania 2000, or No Mercy or Revenge. There's nothing that played that fluidly and that well. I mean, you think about it, there's 4 basically games in that franchise. I know there's WCW on one side and WWF on the other, or WWE, or whatever you want to call it now. But there's 4 games on a single console run. That's pretty remarkable. And then they haven't been able to recreate that magic since. Nobody's been able to do it. What does it take? What's the story with those games? And why did it work so well? Why did we love it so much? And where are we today? That brings us to what I'm talking about right now. This new GoldenEye doc that I discovered a few months ago during my research phase, I guess, my casting the net wide for N64 Quest. It's called Golden Era, and it talks about the creation, the production, the release, and the subsequent years after GoldenEye for the 64 hit and that impact. So it rides the kind of impact wave from everybody that was part of it, that created it, and everybody that got to play it as well. So you get to see both sides of the coin. It's directed by a fellow named Drew Roller out of Australia, which is really interesting to hear. I mean, I don't really have any preconceived notions where people make pop culture documentaries, but it was cool to see that it was made by an Australian filmmaker. And I got to connect with Drew last night, actually. Despite the time zone difference, he was able to rise a little bit early. And I thank him for that. And we were able to talk, filmmaking, filmmaking when it comes to video game documentaries. We did a little bit of trauma bonding, and I'm going to have him on a live stream. It'll probably be a pre-recorded thing depending on the time. Maybe it'll be live. You can ask your questions as well. It was a good talk because we've gone through some similar things, the struggle to make something, the arduous travel involved, the release, the reception, and then continuing to make sure that the film has life after the initial splash and where it can go. So it was a very good conversation. Like I said, we're going to have Drew on at some point, and we'll talk to him a little bit more in depth and get your questions ahead of time. But what I like about what this documentary does, and I talked yesterday about pop culture documentaries, do they just cover the surface material? Do they just address the kind of promise of premise? Is it just, here's a documentary on X from beginning to end, and then that's it? And does it do anything else? And if it just does kind of A to B, like the promise of premise, it's kind of a good 6, 7 out of 10. What I really like about Golden Era and Drew's documentary in particular is we get a little bit of the before and we get a lot of the after, right? I find, and I'm sure you're just like me, that when a film ends, I want to know what happened next. What happened to these people that we got to know over the last 90 minutes? Where did it go? And Drew goes the extra mile to include that in his film, so we get to see what happens. Now, the film focuses on the production team at Rare, the team that developed and produced GoldenEye. And it was such a lightning in the bottle circumstances. I don't want to give too much away, but it would have been that kind of thing would be impossible to happen today, especially with a franchise like James Bond. When GoldenEye was made, the Bond franchise was a little bit at a low point. So the fact that an indie studio could come in and get a license for it and create a game is just mind-blowing and really kind of special. But you get to meet these folks that end up creating so many iconic games and were a part of a really special time in the gaming industry, right? I think Rare was part of RC Pro-Am and Battletoads on the NES. And of course, they have connections to Donkey Kong on the SNES and the N64. And then GoldenEye and Perfect Dark. And then they go off into different directions as well. It's, again, what I love about it is, yes, I was hooked in by the fact that there was a documentary on GoldenEye. But what kept me there was the inner workings, the process. But what put a smile on my face was getting to know the people responsible for something that I love. And the fact that they created something that's so beloved and it stems from them, it means that there's something in them that, of course, that I have to have a connection point to. Otherwise, I wouldn't like the thing that they made, right? Because everything we make is a reflection of us. And when I was talking to Drew, he was saying that, it's been universally positive receptions. A few people have said the second half of the film, has been getting dogged on a bit. And that really kind of bothered me. It's not that, criticism is a bad thing, but I think some people are missing the point. But when you look at a film that's about GoldenEye and you spend, the last third of the film talking about stuff that isn't about GoldenEye, it's about the team that made GoldenEye and what they did after, I think I can understand where they're coming from. But the reality is, all it does is underline the importance of the game when you see what happens to the team and the games they try to, put out, and how GoldenEye is still the standard that's almost impossible to live up to, much like those THQ wrestling games that I mentioned, right? It's just really hard to duplicate. It's just really hard to go back there. So I urge you very, very, very much to check out Golden Era. And in fact, you can check out Golden Era's shop online and get a special edition Blu-ray that comes in N64-like packaging. I think I first acquired mine digitally via Apple TV. So it's out there and it's expanding its presence too. Check out GoldenEye again, Golden Era. It's on the GoldenEye documentary. I'm going to watch it again because I think even I missed a bunch of stuff that I saw there. The more I think about it, the more questions I have about how did this happen again. So check it out when you get a chance. Let's move our chat on to the next question. And that is the next topic, rather. And that is talking about Dave Filoni. So Dave Filoni, if you don't know, is, kind of found himself in the position of being a bit of a Star Wars mainstay at Lucasfilm. He started in the Clone Wars. He's largely responsible for the Clone Wars series as a showrunner, despite not knowing much about animation, and has kind of stuck with Lucasfilm ever since. He's kind of the guru of everything when it comes to like what happens in the Star Wars universe. They have an actual position for that, by the way. Did you know that they have like an archivist, like a librarian that they can go to and say, what does this mean? And what is this connection? And kind of fact check this for me. It's a pretty cool job, right? Filoni in recent years has been integral to The Mandalorian on Disney Plus, the Book of Boba Fett, and recently he was show running Ahsoka. So he's gone from the Clone Wars cartoon series to basically being in the background as the sequel trilogy with the Rise of Skywalker, The Last Jedi, and The Force Awakens. I don't know why I said them in reverse order, but I did. He was in the background a bit for that stuff, from what I'm led to believe. But then he emerged as kind of this champion alongside Jon Favreau when The Mandalorian came out for this just simple, direct, clear way of storytelling. And I think it's kind of underrated and underappreciated to a degree, but he has learned a lot as a filmmaker, but also merged it with his like exceptional storytelling skills. Now, no one is perfect in anything like that, but Filoni, from what he's been doing, seems to get it, which I think is cool. But again, the whole kind of thesis for today's discussion is they're telling us this is what matters. So there was a news point that Filoni is now the chief creative officer at Lucasfilm. Now, what does that mean? He didn't really go on to define it, other than that he's going to be involved earlier on in the process of different shows and movies, working alongside Kathleen Kennedy, which is interesting language as opposed to not reporting to Kathleen Kennedy, but working alongside. And I don't know if this is like setting her up for retirement so that he can take over, but he doesn't have the experience. I really don't kind of care. Again, going back to them telling this is what matters, right? I don't know that this does matter. He's going to be involved in Star Wars is the takeaway. Well, we knew that, and he's always been that. To me, this sounds like, well, he's getting a new position, a promotion, and he's going to get paid probably more than he has been because he's been pretty crucial in everything that they've done, which good for him. I don't know that it's going to have a bigger impact on anything that's coming out in Star Wars because he's still invested in it. He's still going to spend all his days doing it. He still has his own film coming out that ties together Ahsoka, Mandalorian, and the Book of Boba Fett together in one big kind of Avengers Infinity War like capacity. What happens after that will be interesting. How much is he looking beyond that? How much of his time is going to be taken up by him filmmaking and writing that film versus, being a part of other ones would be an interesting juggle. But it's like, hey, we need some Star Wars news to let people know that things are still relevant. Why are people telling us this? Like, why does this matter? Is this supposed to excite us? Is this supposed to get us worried? Because, I mean, in the Filoni era of Star Wars, a lot of people have kind of heralded him as like the next George Lucas or George's kind of understudy, his apprentice, because of his love for Star Wars and his treatment of the IP. I don't know that I'd go that far, but he's knowledgeable and he knows what he's doing. I just don't know that this needs to be a news point. And even me talking about it kind of emphasizes, well, I'm telling you what matters. Well, am I though? I think ultimately the good stuff is what matters most, right? So when we see something on the TV screen or on our phones or in the movie theater, as long as it's good, that's what matters. I don't need the reassurance of all these background administrative pushes to make me feel better about what's going. It's not going to change whether I watch something. You want me to watch something, then convince me it's worth watching. This is, very low rung on the ladder to do that. I think, give me a cool poster, maybe a trailer if I have time, but find a way to generate like significant buzz on a project by project level, not an overarching thing. Because when you start pushing an overarching thing, you start getting a lot of arrows thrown at that hierarchy, right? It doesn't work out. Because look how many people wanted to like behead Kathleen Kennedy for all the problems with, like Solo, for example. Well, that was supposed to be a trilogy, and now it's not. And then it was supposed to be a TV show, and I don't know if that's happening. So I don't know. The sequel trilogy did not do as well as people thought. There was more questions than answers. It's up in the air. They're trying to course correct a little bit. They've got a new movie, at least movie, maybe a movie trilogy with Daisy Ridley. And again, there was a non-news point about her saying, I've read the script. I don't know if it's more than one thing. Or I haven't read the script, but I know the story. But she's excited to be back in the world. And, I guess I can understand why she's excited, although it felt like that whole group of actors from the sequel trilogy felt kind of burnt out and jaded a little bit after the last film came out, maybe because it's such a machine. Johnny Boyega was like, hey, I think there's some misrepresentation here, the way they're trying to set up Finn. I don't think Oscar Isaac has said too much. Daisy Ridley, I think all she said is like, oh, yeah, they didn't know what they were doing. It was going to be this. It was going to be that. So since the sequel trilogy, she's gone on to be in a few different things, but nothing has really like been a massive like impact, like a career defining moment for her. She's a great actress. She's done some great work. So it's interesting to see her come back to Star Wars. And I think it's cool, anytime you can bring in a big movie star to do another movie and continue the story, that's awesome. I'll always take new as long as it's new and it's not a rehash, right? Give me something that I can be excited about. That kind of leads us exactly to the next topic that we're talking about, and that's some Superman casting. So Superman Legacy, the James Gunn film, not his first in DC because he did the Suicide Squad, but the first since he's taking over as head of that regime. I forget the individual that he's kind of co-heading with. He's been doing some casting announcement for this new Superman film that he's doing. And it was released yesterday that Nicholas Hoult, who you might know as Dracula's apprentice in the recently released Renfield film. He was also in the film The Menu, which is kind of a thriller, horror, suspense tale. Again, The Menu is an amazing film. Check it out if you can. It also stars Ralph Fiennes. Nicholas Hoult joins the Superman Legacy cast as Lex Luthor. And what's interesting about that to me is the story went on to say he originally wanted to play Superman. He's a pretty frail and thin-looking fella. He would certainly have to put on some muscle mass, but he also wanted to be Batman, and Matt Reeves' Batman, of course, that went to Robert Pattinson. And it really got me thinking, it's okay. Again, we love all this Hollywood show business news, and that made a number of headlines that Lex Luthor's been cast because you kind of want to set up the hero and the villain dichotomy. It doesn't matter. And so they're telling us it does, which is great. But, this comes down to casting versus story. Okay. This is the big, tough question maybe for this week. Would you rather have a great actor in a film where the story isn't great? Or would you rather have a not so great actor or even not a great performance in a story that is good? Which do you prefer? The face or the tail? And I don't know. There's obviously not a right answer, although I'll suggest one for you. It's a conundrum, right? Because you're hoping that the story is always the best, because without a good story, so I'm going to lean on the story side. I think unless you have a good story, the film doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much a great standout performance is. It'll ultimately feel hollow and let you down in the end, right? You've got to have a great tale, a great structure, something that resonates. And the only way that can come to life, though, is with casting. But at least if there's a good story there, when you think back on it, when you tell people about it, you get to share that thing. Simple. But who doesn't love some performances in films that were kind of stinkers? The kind of stuff that makes you want to do impressions of it, the kind of thing that, not necessarily gives, award buzz, but can be a good moment for somebody's career. I don't know. Ultimately, I think casting is secondary to the writing. Box office receipts will tell you otherwise, because a lot of people will go see a movie based on the actor that's in it, and to a lesser extent, the director. It's usually Genre, actor, then director are the things that get people to see movies. So what kind of movie is it? Who's in it? And kind of who made it are the three marketing things. Because nobody can see the story in advance. That's the big kind of deciding factor after, right? We get to judge the whole film after we get to see it. But those are the three leading factors that get us to decide, do we want to see it? What genre is it? Is it an action film? Is it a horror film? Is it a suspense film? Is it a rom-com? Oh yeah, I want to see that. Okay, but who's in it? Well, these are the people that are in it. It's like, oh, well, who made it? Oh, well, these are three things that I can get on board with, and therefore I'll spend my time and money to see it. Which is really strange, right? You think that here's, and I guess this is why, films and reboots, but adaptations are such a powerful marketing tool, right? Because when you can market that this is based on the book, the story is out there. So people know that the story could be good, and then that gets cycled back into the formula. Like, oh, this is, like in Renfield's case, a retelling of the Dracula tale from a slightly different perspective. Oh, okay, so they're going to do Dracula. I know that story, and I know that setup in that scenario. But who's going to be in it? Oh, Nicolas Cage's Dracula. That sounds fun. I want to see that. So it makes sense that adaptations and reboots work that way. But it feels backwards that it's almost like a smoke and mirrors. It's like, hey, we're going to build this up, build this up. This is everything that's involved, but we're not going to tell you what happens. And I'm kind of guilty of it too, because nobody knows what Planet Cool Stuff is other than what I say. It's discussions and segments on pop culture topics from, toys and video games, movies, and everything else in between. And here are the people that are in it. And here's who made it. And I don't know how to break that formula other than I'm speaking the language that you're used to hearing, but I don't necessarily like it. So I guess, when you look at the Kickstarter for Planet Cool Stuff, I give you an episode list so you can see that, hey, we compare all these Mario games, or there's this awesome toy room tour on Transformers, or we look in Chronicle and dig deep on what Batmania is, or we remember, the legacy of Dick Tracy and try to figure out where it is now and why it's a little bit different than it maybe should be, or how it was when it first came out. So other than that, like other than actually reading the script to you, I don't know what else to do. I think I've become a little bit more forthcoming than some series, especially some series that that I've done too, like N64 Quest. I'm using Nintendo Quest as a way to set it up for you. Jay is going to go hunt these games instead of keeping the games. He's going to raffle them off, or we're going to raffle them off in support of Alzheimer's. You know what to expect with a game hunting series, I would hope. And along the way, we're going to talk about everything that made that era of gaming and those games in that time awesome and why it still matters today. So am I excited that Nicholas Hoult is getting cast as Lex Luthor? I don't really care. In the same way that I didn't really care that Jesse Eisenberg was cast as Lex Luthor, or Kevin Spacey for that matter. I thought, well, these are all interesting decisions, but show me the film and tell me the story. And Superman in particular is a very difficult story to tell, especially 90 minutes to 2 hours. Because you got to take somebody who's basically invincible and either take away his powers so he's vulnerable, and then he has to fight to give them back, and we get them back. And we've seen that story 1,000 times. Or he's got to come up against something so insurmountable that it's impossible for him to defeat. So I don't think that there's a lot of, and I haven't read a lot of Superman comic books, so don't kill me, comic fans. I just don't think there's a lot of shades of gray, a lot of different tales to tell in Superman. That being who he is by his definition of basically a Superman that he can't overcome. I hope that there's an emotional core to it. And if there is, then it's not going to matter who they cast. Like, I don't know the individual cast as Superman, which I kind of like as an unknown, right? That's the rule of unknowns. That's why George Lucas wanted to cast Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker. Nobody has any preconceived notions about this guy coming into the film. So it's a lot easier to project yourself upon him and not expect anything. So it's almost like a counter marketing point there. Yeah, not too sure about that. Let's move on to the last topic here. And this is sports-based video games, all right? Well, where do I start with this? Because I love sports-based video games. I grew up a big Genesis fan. And in fact, check this out. While filming the first leg of N64 Quest, This is a little bit of a video game spotlight for you guys. Look at that. I just slipped that in there. While filming the first leg of N64 Quest, I picked up a couple of games that I've been wanting to have, and they're both sports games. Ta-da! The first is NHL 98 for Genesis, the last EA game released for Genesis, NHL 98. Haven't played it, but I want to. And then the other game I picked up was Super Blood Hockey for the Nintendo Switch. Tell me that doesn't look like a lot of fun. I can't wait to check that one out. It's, premium edition games. Number 1 right there. The question, though, is do we need sports games released every year? They tell us this is what matters, that we get a whole new game every year with, discussion on who's going to be on the cover. What are the new features and what are the new modes? Is it going to play different? Have they tweaked the formula? Is it perfected? Is it a little bit better? I bought into it as a kid because it was that one game I got to have every year, and it felt like a big deal, except for NHL 95. Again, I've talked about it a million times, NHL 95. The stat tracking that they introduced ended up bogging down and glitching the system. They couldn't fix it. There's no patches. There's no downloads. There's no updates. But, talking with my friend Tater the Toy Guy, Nathan Sawyer, he loves PUBG, and what they do in PUBG and a lot of other games for that matters, they have seasons. Like look at Mario Kart, right? They have season pass, and they update things, every quarter or every year. Could we not just do that with sports games nowadays? How come EA or these other gaming companies like that put out sports games like 2K, how come you can't just have a free-to-play sports game? Because that's what PUBG is. I think Fortnite too. Why can't you have a free-to-play sports game and then you buy the membership pass, and within that you play for the season, and then you buy the next one with the updated rosters, and you can still tweak stuff along the way? Why do we have to have a different release? Is the user base that influential that you need to drop, a physical unit or a whole new title? I'm really curious about what the answer to that is, because I don't understand why we can't move to that model when it comes to sports games. It seems like a no-brainer. If we can do that with combat games, military shooters, why can't we do that for sports games? It seems like the perfect fit. And, you can do tiered purchases within that. I don't understand that, to be honest. I wish somebody would chime in and let me know why we can't just do a single release per console of something like, NHL, and just have it out there, and then just buy into the seasons and passes, because they're telling us that, hey, every year you better get ready because here's the new one and here's who's on the cover and this is the mode that's different. And I've seen all the gimmicks that they've tried, the cards, the GM mode, all the different online plays, the wacky arcade versions, and it feels like they're really trying to do a bunch of things when I think they're maybe missing the point a little bit. They could just do something so simple, or include all those things on a different level and just say, here's NHL 2023 or 2024, as it probably is now. Here are the modes that you can sign up for. Get the ultimate pass and get everything, or just get, the hockey version instead of like the manager mode and everything else. Why do we have to buy into it every year? And I mean, you look at the titles that hold the least amount of value for game collecting, it's always the sports ones, because they're so dated so quickly. There's nothing lasting within that. And I'm not saying you don't release a physical copy, but just let it be NHL on PS5 by EA Sports, and then let everything else happen in the online environment. Am I wrong? Am I crazy? What is the big point that I'm missing there? I was burnt out last night. I was putting together today's show, and I just saw all these news headlines. And I just have this mentality where I see through it now, where it's just like, why does this matter? It's not clickbait. It's not news. Are we drawing, there's no big thing to talk about, but boy, they want us to really think that this matters most, that this casting announcement, that this promotion matters. And I don't know that it does. I think what matters is the stuff that truly inspires you and changes you and speaks to you at your core. And it's not going to be necessarily anything in those little headlines. I think maybe we get this is going to be the dumbest thing I ever say. I think maybe we get 10 pieces of news every week that is worth talking about with anybody. Right. And everything else is just noise. Everything else is up there just to provide a new article on a website that you go to so that it looks like there's a bunch of stuff out there, but it's really just not. My favorite is when a book comes out that's in the pop culture space. Someone will write a tell-all book, their first memoir, and then you'll have like 15 articles. And every article basically attacks like 1 or 2 lines that are put in this book, and they write their 300 words about it just so that you can click the article, see the ads come up, and then move on to the next thing. So you feel like you've read the book, or like you've just wasted a lot of time reading a 2-sentence thing where the journalist has now interpreted what that means and either taken it out of context or projected their own meaning onto something to get you excited. And I'm just sick of people trying to tell me what matters. You know what matters. You can feel it in somebody getting a promotion at Lucasfilm to essentially do the same thing that they're already doing. Doesn't matter. Somebody getting cast as Lex Luthor doesn't matter. A new sports game coming out ultimately probably doesn't matter. A GoldenEye documentary, that matters because we haven't heard that story before. We haven't seen that put together. Does it matter in the scope of another video game documentary? Yeah, because I think it's a little bit more about people. I think it's a little bit more about something that's bigger culturally. So that's the big thing I'm leaving with you for this week. That's the big takeaway. Everything else I said you can throw into the garbage can. Why not? But check out Golden Era, directed by Drew Roller. You'll be able to find it. Just type it in. And again, hey, maybe that Blu-ray. Save physical media. Guillermo del Toro talked about, DVDs and Blu-rays are at Fahrenheit 451, in which we've got to preserve these things. We got to become the keepers of them because everything is disappearing because it's just digital only. And when the streaming of it is done, it's gone forever. Which brings us back to Planet Cool Stuff. It is live on Kickstarter. We are 2/3 of our way towards our goal. I want to know who our heroic sponsor is going to be. Whose logo do I get to put at the beginning of every single episode? Do you have a toy store? Do you have a video game store? And do you want to have your branding on top of everything? This is your chance. I think you should do it. Thanks so much for checking in on this daily dose of Planet Cool Stuff. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk